Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling? That moment when your mind seems clearer, more lucid than during the day? When the layers of distraction dissipate and you wonder if you are truly living the life you were meant to live. It is fascinating how in these moments of sudden clarity, we simultaneously feel a deeper connection with our own existence and an unsettling discomfort, as if truly waking up had a price, as if every step toward what we call consciousness, awakening, distanced us from something that also has value. We rarely stop to consider what we lose when we gain clarity. We are so focused on what it means to be awake that we forget to honor what we leave behind in the process. There is a certain beauty in the mist, a functionality in illusion, a purpose in unconsciousness that our stubborn desire for lucidity often prevents us from appreciating. What are we really losing when we awaken? What do we sacrifice on the altar of expanded consciousness? For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived without the modern compulsion to constantly question their own lives. Paleolithic hunter-gatherers did not wake up every morning wondering whether they were fulfilled in their careers or whether their relationships met their emotional expectations. They simply lived according to the established rhythms of their communities and environments. Life had more immediate urgencies. Survival was a full-time occupation. There is something deeply integrated in this way of existing that our hyper-conscious society can no longer access. When you are fully absorbed by the immediate need to find food, to protect your group from predators, or to navigate a storm, you experience a form of presence that is not mediated by layers of reflection. It is a state of being that does not know the existential anxiety that characterizes modern consciousness. As human civilization evolved, we began creating distance between ourselves and this direct form of existence. Agriculture gave us surpluses that allowed free time, and with that free time came reflection. The great religions emerged, offering comprehensive narratives that answered the existential questions we began to ask. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens after death? These narratives provided comfort and meaning. They offered certainties in a world full of uncertainties. When you believed without doubt that there is a God who created the universe, who has a plan for your life, and who will receive you into an eternal realm after death, you experienced a form of existential security that is almost inaccessible to the modern awakened mind. It is ironic that when we speak of awakening, we often refer to an expansion of consciousness, a greater ability to perceive the complexities and contradictions of human existence. But this expansion comes at a cost. Each layer of consciousness we acquire distances us a little more from the simplicity of being, from the unquestioned acceptance of life as it presents itself. We think we are advancing, but in certain aspects, we are moving away from something fundamental. The history of humanity can be seen as a successive series of awakenings, each taking us further from the original integration with the simple flow of life. With the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, we experienced another collective awakening. We began to question the religious narratives that had sustained our understanding of the world for millennia. We replaced the certainty of faith with the curiosity of scientific inquiry. We gained knowledge, precision, technology, and unprecedented control over our environment. But we also lost something. We lost the feeling of living in an enchanted world where rivers had spirits, where lightning was an expression of divine anger, where every event, no matter how trivial or tragic, had meaning within a broader cosmic plan. Max Weber called this the disenchantment of the world. When we explain the rainbow as light refraction, it ceases to be a bridge to the realm of the gods or a divine promise. It becomes physics, precise, explainable, but in a certain way diminished. I am not suggesting that we should reject science and return to mythical explanations of the world. Far from it. Scientific knowledge has brought extraordinary advances that have improved our lives in countless ways. I am simply acknowledging that there is a trade-off, that each new layer of consciousness both reveals and obscures. Perhaps the most powerful example of this trade-off comes from psychology. Freud and his successors awakened us to the complexities of the human mind, to the impulses and desires that inhabit our unconscious, to the behavioral patterns we repeat without realizing it. This awakening gave us tools to better understand our motivations, to treat mental disorders, to build healthier relationships, but it also robbed us of the ability to simply be without constantly analyzing our thoughts and behaviors. Psychological self-awareness is a double-edged sword. It frees us from dysfunctional patterns, but it can also trap us in endless cycles of analysis and doubt. Think of small children who have not yet developed dense layers of reflective consciousness. They are capable of a total absorption in the present moment that many adults can only achieve in rare instances, often through practices like meditation or peak experiences. A child playing is not wondering whether they are playing correctly, whether they look ridiculous, or whether they should be doing something else. They are simply playing, completely absorbed in the experience. There is a freedom in this that we lose as we mature and awaken to the complexities and social judgments of life. Modern neurosis is in large part a product of this excess of consciousness. We are constantly observing ourselves, judging our actions against internalized standards, comparing our lives with those of others, questioning our choices. This creates a distance between us and our own experience. Instead of simply living, we are always watching ourselves live, and this internal division is a source of suffering. Philosopher Alan Watts described this as the feeling of being simultaneously the actor and the audience in our own drama, never fully immersed in the role because we are too busy evaluating our performance. The irony is that many spiritual traditions seek a different kind of awakening, one that would bring us back to a more direct and integrated form of experience. Zen Buddhism, for example, speaks of the beginner's mind, a state in which we observe the world without the distortions of our accumulated concepts, judgments, and expectations. The paradox is that this kind of awakening requires that we fall asleep to many of the layers of consciousness we consider markers of intellectual and psychological sophistication. We must unlearn to achieve this deeper clarity. However, In our contemporary society, we see an opposite trend. With every new technological advancement, with every new social media platform, with every new opportunity for consumption, we are moving even further from direct experience and entering increasingly dense layers of mediation and reflexivity. We are constantly photographing ourselves, living instead of simply living. We are documenting experiences instead of feeling them fully. We are consuming the representation of life instead of life itself. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this constant awakening most awakens your fear or apprehension? Do you lie down at night thinking about this too? I know we often keep these concerns to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of appearing paranoid or technophobic in a world that celebrates every new innovation without question. But your worries are valid and probably shared by more people than you imagine. Share in the comments. My biggest fear about our increasingly conscious future is your voice may help create a space where we can honestly discuss these collective fears instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these fears together, we can begin imagining ways to face them. Artificial intelligence represents the next great awakening of humanity, one that promises to expand our collective consciousness beyond its current limits. We are creating systems that can process and analyze quantities of information that far exceed the capacity of the human brain. We are developing algorithms that can identify patterns that escape our perception. We are building interfaces that allow us to access knowledge and communication in increasingly immediate and integrated ways. All of this is awakening us to dimensions of reality that were previously beyond our capacity for perception. But what are we losing in this process? As we increasingly rely on external systems to think for us, are we losing certain cognitive abilities? Studies suggest yes. Our capacity for memory, for spatial navigation, for sustained attention all seem to be affected by constant use of digital technology. More deeply, we are losing forms of knowledge that cannot be captured by algorithms and databases. The embodied knowledge that comes from doing something with your own hands repeatedly over time. The intuitive knowledge that arises from long immersion in a particular field or practice. The relational knowledge that emerges from direct contact with other people without the mediation of screens and interfaces. There is something particularly concerning about the way digital technology is restructuring our experience of time. We live in a state of perpetual distraction, jumping from one notification to another, from one feed to another, rarely allowing our attention to settle deeply on anything. This fragmentation of consciousness has profound implications. It affects our ability to form coherent memories, to build meaningful narratives about our lives, to experience the kind of deep immersion that leads to creative discoveries and genuine connections. Philosopher Bernard Stiegler argued that we are living in a crisis of attention in which our capacity for sustained attention is being systematically captured and fragmented by systems designed to monetize every moment of our consciousness. It is not just that we are distracted, it is that our distraction has become a commodity, something to be bought and sold on the global market. In this process, we lose autonomy over our own consciousness. We awaken to a world of infinite possibilities for information and communication, but we fall asleep to our ability to determine the focus of our own attention. Another aspect of what we lose when we awaken is related to community and belonging. In traditional societies, identity was something given, determined by birth, by place, by family, by religion. There were limitations in these prescribed identities, certainly, especially for those who did not fit dominant expectations. But there was also an existential safety in knowing your place in the world, in having a clear set of values and practices shared with those around you, in feeling part of something greater than yourself. As we awaken to the multiplicity of ways of being, to the historical and cultural contingency of our identities and values, we gain freedom and possibility. We can choose who we want to be. We can question traditions. We consider oppressive or limiting. We can create new forms of community based on affinity rather than proximity. But we also lose something profound. We lose the sense of unquestionable belonging, the safety of clear boundaries, the comfort of definitive answers. The sociologist Zygmunt Bauman called our era liquid modernity, characterized by the dissolution of stable social structures and the continual need for self-invention. We are always in flux, always becoming, never simply being. This creates a permanent anxiety, a feeling that we are never doing enough, never becoming enough, never reaching the imaginary destination where we can finally rest in the certainty of who we are. It is important to note that this liquidity does not affect everyone equally. Those with sufficient material and cultural resources may experience it as freedom, as an opportunity for self-expression and exploration. Those without these resources often experience the same liquidity as precariousness, as a lack of support structures, as an impossible demand for constant adaptation to rapidly changing circumstances. The awakening of collective consciousness does not happen uniformly or equitably. Another aspect of what we lose when awakening is related to our relationship with nature. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings lived in intimate contact with the natural world. Our bodies and minds evolved in savanna, forest, coastal, and mountain environments. Our sensory perception, our biological rhythms, our emotional psychology, all were shaped by this immersion in nature. As we build increasingly elaborate artificial environments, as we mediate our experience of the world through layers of technology, we lose this direct connection with the natural systems that sustain us and of which we are part. This disconnection has obvious practical consequences, such as the climate crisis and the sixth mass extinction we are witnessing. When we do not directly experience our dependence on natural systems, it becomes easier to ignore the signs of stress in these systems. But it also has more subtle psychological and spiritual consequences. What has been called nature deficit disorder is linked to increases in mental health problems, particularly anxiety, depression, and attention deficit. There is something in the direct sensory experience of the natural world that nurtures our well-being in ways we are only beginning to understand scientifically, but that traditional cultures have always intuitively recognized. As we awaken to a sophisticated scientific understanding of the natural world, we gain extraordinary knowledge about the physical, chemical, and biological processes that sustain life. We can map genomes, model ecosystems, predict climate patterns, but we lose the direct sensory experience of being part of nature, of feeling the rhythm of the seasons in the body, of knowing a place so intimately that every subtle change is noticeable, of identifying plants and animals not by their scientific names in a book, but through repeated encounters over time. This awakening to abstract knowledge, accompanied by a falling asleep to embodied experience, is particularly evident in our relationship with food. We know more than ever about nutrition, about the biochemical components of foods, about the global supply chains that bring products to our tables. But most people in industrialized societies have little or no direct experience with growing food, with preparing meals from basic ingredients, with the seasonal rhythm of the availability of different plants and animals. We awaken to the science of nutrition, but fall asleep to the culture of food, to the embodied knowledge of how food connects humans to each other and to the earth. There is also something profound we have lost regarding death. In traditional societies, death was a constant and visible presence. People died at home, surrounded by family. Bodies were prepared for burial by loved ones. Mourning rituals were elaborate and shared. There was a familiarity with death, an acceptance of its inevitability that allowed it to be integrated into the experience of life more fully. In our modern societies, we awaken to extraordinary medical interventions that prolong life, to detailed understandings of the biological processes of death. But we fall asleep to the direct experience of death as part of life. We isolate the dying in hospitals and nursing homes. We hand over the care of the dead to professionals. We avoid talking about death, treating it as a technical failure to be indefinitely postponed, rather than a transition to be faced with dignity and meaning. This awakening to the possibility of prolonging life, accompanied by a falling asleep to the acceptance of death, creates a peculiar form of anxiety. We live longer than our ancestors on average, but often with more fear of death, with fewer cultural and spiritual resources to give meaning to our finitude. Paradoxically, this denial of death can diminish our capacity to live fully. When we try to avoid the awareness of our mortality, we may also fall asleep to the preciousness of each moment, to the urgency of living according to our deepest values, to the importance of expressing love and gratitude while we still can. One of the most disturbing aspects of what we lose when awakening is related to privacy and interiority. As our lives become increasingly digitized and connected, we awaken to unprecedented possibilities for communication and sharing. We can instantly transmit our thoughts, feelings, and experiences to global audiences. We can connect with people who share our most specific interests, no matter where they are in the world. We can document and archive every aspect of our lives, but in this process, we are losing something crucial: the protected space of privacy where interiority can develop. The writer and philosopher Iris Murdoch spoke of the importance of the unseen work of consciousness, the internal process of reflection, contemplation, and moral development that happens out of sight of others. In the age of social media, there is constant pressure to externalize, to turn thoughts and feelings into content, to be shared and consumed. This pressure for constant externalization affects not only what we choose to share, but also what we choose to perceive and value in the first place. We begin to experience our lives through the lens of their shareability. A sunset becomes an opportunity for an Instagram photo. A moment of accomplishment becomes a LinkedIn post. An intimate reflection becomes a tweet. In this process, our attention is trained to value what can be displayed and rewarded with social approval to the detriment of what may be meaningful only internally, invisible to others. Moreover, constant surveillance, both by corporations and governments, is eroding the very possibility of privacy. Our devices track our location, our browsing habits, our purchases, our conversations. Algorithms analyze this data to predict and influence our behavior. We awaken to a world of unprecedented convenience and personalization, but fall asleep to the autonomy that comes from having a mental space that is unmonitored, unmediated, unmonetized. The paradox here is that the more transparent we become, the more our lives are recorded, archived, and analyzed, the less we know ourselves in certain fundamental ways. Self-knowledge requires privacy. It requires space to experiment, to make mistakes, to contemplate possibilities that may never materialize. It requires the freedom not to be consistent, to contradict ourselves, to change our minds without having to explain or justify these changes to an audience. Another aspect of what we lose when awakening is related to attention and contemplation. In our hyper-connected world, we awaken to an incessant flow of information and stimulus. We have instant access to news from around the world, to vast repositories of knowledge, to infinite entertainment options. We never need to be bored, never need to be unoccupied, never need to sit with our own thoughts without distraction. But this constant external stimulation comes at a cost. We lose the capacity for sustained attention, the ability to delve deeply into a single subject, text, or practice for long periods. We lose the experience of productive boredom, that seemingly empty state that often precedes the deepest creative insights. We lose the practice of contemplation, the patient immersion in a question or problem without the pressure of immediate resolution. The philosopher Josef Pieper argued that contemplation requires a certain receptivity, an openness for the world to reveal itself on its own terms, rather than being grasped and processed according to our goals and projects. In constant connectivity, we lose this receptivity. We are always searching, always processing, always responding. We are rarely simply present, available to whatever may arise. This loss of contemplation has profound implications for our capacity for wisdom. Information is not the same as knowledge, and knowledge is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom requires not only the accumulation of facts and experiences, but their integration, their digestion through sustained reflection. It requires the ability to consider multiple perspectives, to postpone judgments, to sit with paradoxes and contradictions. All of these capacities are hindered by the culture of constant connectivity and instant gratification. There is a certain irony in the fact that many spiritual traditions teach that true awakening comes through stillness, through the reduction of external stimulation, through the slowing down of discursive thought. In contrast, our technological awakening leads us to constant acceleration, to more connections, more information, more possibilities. Perhaps we are confusing one type of awakening with another, seeking expansion, when what we really need is contraction, seeking more when what we really need is less. The Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han argues that we are living in a society of exhaustion characterized by an excess of positivity, by the constant imperative to do more, be more, connect more. This excessive positivity, paradoxically, drains us. There is no room for negativity in the sense of pause, refusal, limits. There is no room for what he calls the gift of deep listening, the capacity to attend fully to what is present without immediately trying to act on it, change it, or control it. This is perhaps the central paradox of our technological awakening. The more we expand our power and reach through technology, the harder it becomes to experience the kind of attentive presence that many wisdom traditions identify as true awakening. We expand our consciousness in certain dimensions while contracting it in others. The question we face is not whether we should awaken or not. We cannot simply return to a previous state of unconsciousness, nor would it be desirable to do so. The gains in knowledge, freedom, and possibility that accompany our collective awakening are real and valuable. The question is whether we can find forms of awakening that do not require us to completely abandon what we are leaving behind. Can we cultivate sophisticated scientific knowledge while maintaining a sense of wonder and mystery before the natural world? Can we harness the power of digital technologies while preserving spaces for sustained attention and interiority? Can we embrace the freedom of self-definition while creating new forms of belonging and shared meaning? Can we be fully aware of our mortality while living with vitality and joy? I do not have definitive answers to these questions. What I suggest is that any form of awakening worth pursuing should include an awareness of what we are losing in the process. It should include a commitment to carry with us in some form the capacities and experiences that are being threatened by our new modes of consciousness. Perhaps true awakening is not simply adding more layers of knowledge, complexity, and reflexivity to our experience. Perhaps it is the ability to move fluidly between different modes of consciousness, to be fully present in each moment with all the faculties appropriate for that particular moment. There are moments that call for critical analysis and reflection. There are moments that call for technical knowledge and expertise. There are moments that call for sensory immersion and embodied presence. There are moments that call for wonder and receptivity. There are moments that call for intimate connection and vulnerability. There are moments that call for decisive action and moral clarity. To truly awaken could mean not being trapped in any one of these modes, but developing the wisdom to know which is appropriate for each situation and the flexibility to move between them with grace. It could mean integrating our different types of knowledge, honoring both analytical rationality and embodied intuition, both scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom. If we look at the great wisdom traditions of the world, many of them speak of an awakening that transcends and includes earlier levels of development. It is not simply abandoning what came before, but transforming it and integrating it into a new synthesis. Awakening is not linear, but spiral, returning to the same points at increasingly deeper levels of understanding and integration. This more integrative vision of awakening suggests that we do not need to choose between the simplicity of being and the complexity of reflection, between direct immersion in experience and the conceptual understanding of that experience. We can cultivate the capacity to inhabit both modes, to appreciate what each has to offer, to move between them according to the needs of the moment. In practice, this may mean deliberately creating spaces in our lives for different types of experience and consciousness. It may mean regular periods of digital disconnection to allow slower and more embodied forms of attention to flourish. It may mean practices that help us reconnect with the natural world, not only conceptually, but sensorially. It may mean cultivating face-to-face relationships that allow us to experience the embodied presence of other human beings. It may mean creating communities based on shared values and practices which offer a sense of belonging without requiring dogmatic conformity. It may also mean developing a more conscious relationship with our technological tools. Instead of allowing them to structure our consciousness by default, we can learn to use them with more intentionality. We can choose which capacities we want to amplify and which we want to preserve without technological mediation. We can design and select technologies that enhance our autonomy and capacity for attention rather than fragmenting them, as we move toward a future where artificial intelligence and other technologies promise to expand our collective consciousness even further. These considerations become even more important. How can we ensure that our next great awakening does not come at the expense of the human capacities we value most? How can we ensure that it expands our potential rather than diminishing it? How can we ensure that it makes us more fully human, not less? These are questions we need to face collectively through broad and inclusive conversations about the kind of future we want to create. They cannot be left solely to technical experts or market forces. They require the collective wisdom of diverse traditions and perspectives, including those that may seem outdated or irrelevant to the modern eye. If these reflections touched on something you have been feeling, but perhaps had not found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us in this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. The awakening I am advocating is not a rejection of modern consciousness or technology. It is not a nostalgic return to some idealized past. It is a more complete integration of different forms of knowledge and experience, a synthesis that honors both what we have gained and what we are at risk of losing. It is an awakening that recognizes that being human has always meant living with paradoxes and contradictions, that there will never be a final resolution to the tensions that define our existence. It is an awakening to complexity, to uncertainty, to the limits of knowledge, but also to the possibilities that exist precisely within those limits. It is, above all, an awakening to our interdependence, to the fact that we are part of systems much larger than ourselves, from our families and communities to planetary ecosystems and the long arcs of human history. It is an awakening to the responsibility that comes with this interdependence, to the fact that our individual and collective choices shape the future in ways we are only beginning to understand. What we lose when we awaken does not need to be lost forever. It can be transformed, integrated, carried with us in new ways. Innocence can become wisdom. Unconscious belonging can become chosen connection. Sensory immersion can become full presence. Acceptance can become commitment. True awakening is not toward separation, but toward connection, not toward judgment, but toward understanding. Not toward control, but toward creative participation in the processes of life and transformation of which we are a part. As we continue on this journey of collective awakening, may we keep alive the memory of what we leave behind, not as a burden of nostalgia, but as a reminder of the capacities and experiences that still define what it means to be human, even as we become something new. Wars of conquest, which were taboo since 1945, are coming back. The relatively stable liberal order of the early 21st century is collapsing. Instead of a cooperative order based on universal values, global institutions, and international laws, we are entering into a super competitive, chaotic world in which only one thing matters, and this one thing is brute force. Leaders like President Trump envision the world as a collection of fortresses, with each country separated from the others by high walls. Financial walls like tariffs, military walls, cultural walls, and physical walls. This vision may have certain advantages, but it fails to address one key problem. Walled fortresses are seldom friendly. Thousands of years of history teach us that each national fortress would probably want a bit more security, prosperity, and territory for itself at the expense of the neighbors. And in the absence of universal values, global institutions, and international laws, how would rival fortresses resolve their disputes? For millennia, the vision of the world as a collection of fortresses always led to exactly the same outcome: a never-ending cycle of wars, with powerful empires conquering their weaker neighbors and eventually fighting each other for supremacy. This is already beginning to happen all around us. Wars of conquest, which were taboo since 1945, are coming back.
So you are a military, you studied the military history of the Middle East. Did you ever expect to now be the foremost expert on all things AI and whether we are doomed as humanity?
I'm not the foremost expert, but I didn't expect to be talking about AI with such an audience. As you said, I was originally a specialist in medieval military history, and but the Middle Ages are coming back in many ways.
Okay. Okay, we're going to get into that. And then feel free to get into that as I ask you this first question. You call artificial intelligence, or alien intelligence as you refer to it throughout your writing, the rise of a new species that could replace Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
Sapiens, your prior book. What does it mean to be human right now?
To be aware that for the first time we have real competition on the planet. That we have been the most intelligent species by far for tens of thousands of years, and this is how we got from being an insignificant ape in a corner of Africa to being the absolute rulers of the planet and of the ecosystem. And now we are creating something that could compete with us in the very near future. The most important thing to know about AI is that it is not a tool like all previous human inventions. It is an agent. An agent in the sense that it can make decisions independently of us. It can invent new ideas. It can learn and change by itself. All previous human inventions, whether a printing press or the atom bomb, they are tools that empower us.
They needed us.
They need us because a printing press cannot write books by itself, and it cannot decide which books to print. An atom bomb cannot invent the next more powerful bomb, and an atom bomb cannot decide what to attack. An AI weapon can decide by itself which target to attack and design the next generation of weapons by itself.
So this is why you argue that AI is potentially, or it sounds like you're saying is, by the way now, but you've written in the past, potentially more momentous in the invention of the telegraph, the printing press, even writing. But the way you talk about it in Nexus is that it is a baby.
Yeah.
Because it learns from us. And therefore, your argument is that we, especially the powerful leaders in this room, have a lot of responsibility because how we act is how AI will be. You cannot expect to lie and cheat and have benevolent AI.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Yeah, there is a big discussion around the world about AI alignment. Okay, we are creating these increasingly super intelligent, very powerful new agents. How do we make sure that these agents remain aligned with human goals and with the benefit of humanity, that they do what is good for us? And so there is a lot of research and a lot of efforts focused on the idea that if we can design these AIs in a certain way, if we can teach them certain principles, if we can code into them certain goals, then we will be safe. But there are two main problems with this approach. First of all, again, the very definition of AI is that it can learn and change by itself. If you have a machine that can act automatically, but only following pre-programmed orders, then, it's a coffee machine. It can do something automatically, produce coffee, but it cannot decide or invent anything by itself. It's not an AI. So when you design an AI, by definition, this thing is going to do all kinds of things which you cannot anticipate. If you can anticipate everything it will do, it is by definition not an AI. So that's one problem. The other even bigger problem, that we can think about AI, like you said, like a baby or a child. And you can educate a child to the best of your ability, and he or she will still surprise you, for better or worse. No matter how much you invest in their education, they are independent agents. They might eventually do something which will surprise you and even horrify you. The other thing is, everybody who has any knowledge of education knows that in the education of children, it matters far less what you tell them.
And what you do.
It matters far more what you do.
Yeah.
If you tell your kids, don't lie, and your kids watch you lying to other people, they will copy your behavior, not your instructions. Now, if we have now these big projects to educate the AIs, not to lie, but the AIs are given access to the world, and they watch how humans behave, and they see some of the most powerful humans on the planet, including their parents, lying, the AI will copy the behavior. People who think that I can run, say, this huge AI corporation, and while I'm lying, I will teach my AIs not to lie, it will not work. It will copy your behavior.
One of your central arguments is that we as society writ large have focused way too much on power. And you also make the argument that some disagree with or would call counterintuitive, that more information is great for democracies because you say all information is not true information, et cetera.
Most information is not the truth.
Right.
There's a huge confusion between information and truth. Yeah. Yes, some information is true, and you get information to get to know the truth, but generally, the truth is a very, very small subset of most of the information in the universe.
So if we are focusing too much on power, and that's a very important distinction, you say this is why we have failed as people largely to answer actually the biggest questions of life. If we can be more productive, we can be richer, we can have stronger militaries. But many of us can't answer the question, as you write, who are we? What should we aspire to? And what is a good life? Essentially, we are accumulating power, not wisdom.
Yeah.
How can we change it?
And that's the big problem of human history, for thousands of years. We are extremely good in acquiring more power. Again, this is how we transform ourselves from an insignificant ape in East Africa into the ruler of the world. We can fly to the moon, we can split the atom. But we don't seem to be significantly happier than we were in the Stone Age. We don't know how to translate power into happiness. Again, you look at the most powerful people on the planet, they don't seem to be the happiest people on the planet. So there is a very...
Do you want to ask them? There are many of them.
I'm not necessarily referring to the people in this room. I want to clarify, I don't think there is a contradiction between power and happiness. I don't think that as you acquire more power, you necessarily become miserable. No. But it can go together, but it doesn't necessarily go together. And as a species, we have not been particularly good in translating power into happiness or even into knowledge and wisdom. Again, we tend to confuse intelligence with knowledge and with truth. But we are the most intelligent species on the planet. We are also the most delusional species on the planet.
And destructive, you argue.
And self-destructive, yeah. The kind of things that people believe, no other animal on the planet will believe such nonsense.
Like?
Except, if I look at my own country, like, you would not find any animal that believes that if you go and kill other members of your species, you will be rewarded after death by entering paradise. No chimpanzee will believe that. No horse would believe that. No wolf will believe that. Millions of people believe that, and they believe it so strongly that they actually go and kill people in the expectation that as a result, they will be rewarded in paradise with whatever.
We took a really interesting poll this morning asking the leaders in this room how consequential they think AI has been so far in their business. And actually only the businesses they lead, and only a small portion said significantly. Most it was moderately or not at all.
Yeah.
Can you speak to them as if we were sitting here 36 months from now? Is there any world in which AI doesn't have a significant impact on their business?
It depends on their business, but in most fields, again, the question is one of time scale. I've been talking to a lot of the people who lead the AI revolution, and many of them say, you know, we are already in the middle of the AI revolution. We still haven't seen anything really major. And that's just the difference between how historians view time and how CEOs and entrepreneurs view time. For an entrepreneur, 2 years is a long time. For historians, it's nothing. It's like, imagine that we are now sitting in London and the year is 1835. The first railway has been opened between Manchester and Liverpool 5 years ago. And we have now this conference in London in 1835, and people saying, you know, all this talk about railways changing the world, the Industrial Revolution, this is nonsense. We have had railways for ages, 5 years. And look, okay, so there is some changes that they now have people traveling with the trains, or they move around coal more easily. But nothing major happened. Because there is a time lag between the invention of a technology and the moment when you see the actual social and political consequences.
Yeah.
So we now know that the Industrial Revolution and trains, they completely transformed everything. Geopolitics, the way people fight wars, the economy, family structure, but it just took more than 5 years. The same is likely to happen with AI. In all fields, from the obvious to the less obvious, like I think that one of the first fields we'll see major changes is finance.
Okay.
That AI is going very quickly to take over the financial system.
We have some bankers in the room, so tell us more.
Because finance is the ideal playing ground for AI. It's purely an informational realm. If you want to have an AI self-driving vehicle on the road, which has been promised again and again, and we are still not there, the problem...
Waymo.
Yeah, but you go around London, you don't see these tens of thousands of self-driving vehicles yet. I just passed my first driving lesson
Congratulations.
here in the UK, and you still need to learn how to drive.
Okay.
So
but
the problem is that for driving, you need to deal with the messy physical world of pedestrians and holes in the roads and whatever. But in finance, it's only information in, information out. It's much easier for an AI to master that. And what happens to finance once AIs, for instance, start inventing new financial devices that the human brain is simply incapable of dealing with because it's mathematically too complex? We are going to see AI changing even things like religion.
How?
At least religions which are based on texts, like Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, they give ultimate authority to the text, not to any human being. Now, until today, humans were nevertheless the main authority in these religions because the texts could not speak. The Bible could not interpret itself. The Bible could not answer your questions, so you needed a human being as an intermediary. What happens when you have an AI text that can speak for itself? No Jewish rabbi can know all the texts of Judaism because there are too many of them. For the first time in history, there is something on the planet that is able to remember every single word in every writing of every rabbi in the last 2,000 years and talk back to you and explain and defend its views. So I have friends who are now working on building religious AIs that are meant to either augment or replace human religious leaders, especially in text-based religions. If the religion is not based on texts, it doesn't give authority to a text, it's a different story.
Okay, but I go, and we're going to questions next. I'm going to come first to Mattia Moore if you want to raise your hand, and we'll get you a microphone. But I go and talk to my pastor at our church when I am going through a difficult time. I am never going to talk to ChatGPT like that.
But it's an individual choice.
So you think some will?
I know that already millions of people do it. I mean, I know people who go for now AIs to get psychological counseling.
Yes.
That AI is their best friend, like teenagers. Something happened in school, they consult with, they tell the AI what happened and ask for advice about relationships.
So let me get back to, and then the question is next, let me get back to what you said, though, about replacing jobs. This is really important, and you write and talk a lot about what you're worried about, what it becomes a useless class. That's what you've talked about. And it was 5 or 6 years ago, I interviewed Google CEO Sundar Pichai in Oklahoma in one of their data centers. We need many, many more of them now to power AI. And I remember asking him about AI. It was, people were talking about it a lot then, and he essentially told me, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if AI proves to be, quote, in his words, very disruptive to too many American jobs, he essentially said they would be open to slowing it down. Okay. I'm talking about this, not just Google, just writ large, these companies right now. If we are headed for what you're talking about, a potential useless class, many, interestingly, white-collar jobs, so it's getting a little bit more attention, perhaps, than when it replaced blue-collar jobs, which is a whole issue in and of itself. What do we do to make sure we as a society not only survive, but thrive?
I want to emphasize that AI has enormous positive potential as well as dangerous potential. And I don't believe in historical or in technological determinism. You can use the same technology to create completely different kinds of societies. We saw it in the 20th century that you used exactly the same technology to build communist totalitarian regimes and liberal democracies.
That's right.
It's the same with AI. We have a lot of choices about what to do with it, if, again, provided we remember that for the first time we are dealing with agents and not tools. So it makes it much more complicated. But we do have still, most of the agency is in our hands. And the question of how we develop the technology, and even more importantly, how we deploy it, we can make a lot of choices there.
We have agency in how we move forward. We don't have a choice that it has come.
Yeah.
We have power in how we use it and go through it.
Absolutely. The main problem is that now the companies and countries that lead the AI revolution has been locked into an arms race situation. So even if they know that it would be better to slow down, to invest more in safety, to be careful about this or that potential development, they are constantly afraid that if we slow down and they don't slow down, they will take over the world.
So let's get to some questions here. Mattia Moore with Emotion Network. Hi, yes, right here.
Hi, no, so congratulations, because I mean your books are really eye-opening, and so you gave already a lot of answers through your books and also today. We as a company, we have a conference called Tech Emotion because we strongly believe in the power of mixing technology and innovation with emotion, creativity, and culture. But and in what you're saying, this is a lot of a mix of this. So what I think it's really interesting what you are saying about also the effect on religion, the effect on the soul of the people, and this is also related to what she was saying about the purpose of the life of the people that is going to be destroyed or changed a lot by AI, by all these innovations. So how do you think it's possible to get a future where people is going to be more satisfied and more happy and also find more purpose in what they do with the difficulties that this world is changing? So I know this is a big question, but I think that is the most important thing in our life, much more than business, but more than anything else.
Yeah, so it's a very big subject. The most important thing, I only have time to talk about one thing, so the most important thing is that we need to solve our own human problems instead of relying on the AI to do it for us. And the key problem is the problem of trust and cooperation. At the present moment, trust is collapsing all over the world, both between countries and within societies. And the hope that, okay, humans can no longer trust each other, so the international system and the trade system and everything is collapsing, but the AI will save us, will solve. No, it will not. In a world in which humans compete with each other ferociously and cannot trust each other, the AI produced by such a world will be a ferocious, competitive, untrustworthy AI. It's not possible for humans, as they engaged in this ferocious competition, to create benevolent, trustworthy AI. It will just not happen. So if you think about it, it's just a question of priority. We have now this big human trust problem, and we have the issue, how do we develop AI? Too many people think, okay, let's first solve the how do we develop AI problem, and then this will solve the human trust problem. It will not work. We need to get our priorities the other way. First solve the human trust problem, then together we can create benevolent AI. Of course, this is not what is happening right now in the world.
Do we have one more? Yes, right here.
Thanks very much, Yuval. Quick question from me. So, in human history, there's been organizing principles, and you write about that so much in your books. And there's been, in some senses, at least geographically, monolithic organizing principles, like religion and the church was one of those. But when we talk about AI, we're not talking about something that is monolithic, right? There is no the AI. This is really effectively going to be multiple plethoras of AIs manifesting themselves.
Absolutely.
And in that context, when you describe AI replacing religion in some sense, I think the real question for me is, when you have no single organizing principle, there is no the AI that gets developed with any kind of intent, whether that intent is benevolent or otherwise, and there's all of these competing AIs that are effectively evolving fast, what does that world look like?
That's a very, very important point. I mean, the AI will not be one big AI. We are talking about potentially millions or billions of new AI agents with different characteristics, again, produced by different companies, different countries, everywhere. In the military, in the financial system, in the religious system. So you'll have a lot of religious AIs competing with each other. Which AI will be the authoritative AI rabbi for which currents of Judaism? And the same in Islam, and the same in Hinduism, and in Buddhism, and so forth. So you will have competition there. And in the financial system. And we just have no idea what the outcome will be. We have thousands of years of experience with human societies. What happens when millions of humans compete for economic power, for religious authority? It's very complex, but we at least have some experience in how these things develop. We have zero experience in what happens in AI societies when millions of AIs compete with each other. We just don't know. Now, this is not something you can simulate in the AI labs. If OpenAI, for instance, wants to check the safety or the potential outcome of its latest AI model, it cannot simulate history in a laboratory. It can check for all kinds of failures in the system, but it cannot tell in advance what happens when you have millions of copies of these AIs in the big world outside, developing in unanticipated ways, interacting with each other and with billions of human beings. So it's in a way, it's the biggest social experiment in human history. We are all part of it, and nobody has any idea how it will develop. One analogy to keep in mind, we now have this immigration crisis in the US, in Europe, elsewhere. Lots of people worried about immigrants. Why are people worried about immigrants? There are three main things that come to people's mind. They will take our jobs. They come with different cultural ideas. They will change our culture. They may have political agendas. They might try to take over the country politically. These are the three main things that people keep coming back to. Now, you can think about the AI revolution as simply a wave of immigration of millions and billions of AI immigrants that will take people's jobs, that have very different cultural ideas, and that might try to gain some kind of political power. And these AI immigrants, these digital immigrants, they don't need visas. They don't cross the sea in some rickety boat in the middle of the night. They come at the speed of light. And I look, for instance, at far-right parties in Europe. And they talk so much about the human immigrants, sometimes with justification, sometimes without justification. They don't talk almost at all about the wave of digital immigrants that is coming into Europe. And I think they should be much, if they care about the sovereignty of their country, if they care about the economic and cultural future of their country, they should be far more worried about the digital immigrants than about the human immigrants.
Yuval, this has been remarkable. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very, very much. I'll see you after.
The key problem about the world is not evil, it's ignorance, it's delusion.
When you read Nexus, you say humans are smart but also stupid and self-destructive. So it almost like puts you down a bit.
Humans think that with all our technological development, especially in the field of information technology, we will be freed, liberated from ignorance and delusion. And it's not happening. In the monotheistic religions like Christianity and Islam, there is a belief in evil. But in Hinduism and Buddhism, the main idea is that the problem is usually ignorance and delusion. People sometimes think that AI maybe will tell us the truth about the world. Again, it's unlikely to happen. The danger is that AI will entrap us, imprison us within a web of delusions even worse than anything we have seen before in history.